Sounds good. Now we can start our event. First, by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Mahmoud. I'm a PhD student in informatics at the University of Skövde. I work in artificial cognitive systems and intelligent vehicles. I'm specialized in deep learning and reinforcement learning. My background is in electrical engineering and specialized in software engineering. I work with satellites, I work with cloud computing for drones, and now I'm in AI for self-driving cars. So to begin with our event, this event is hosted by the PhD Council. We give all the thanks to the organization, especially by people and others, and it is sponsored by IPSI. IPSI is an industrial research school at the University of Skövde. It is financed by the Knowledge Foundation, the KK Environment Infinity. IPSI is really contributing to making progress in regard of information technology that will benefit individual, organizations, and society. This event was supposed to be on campus, but unfortunately, we needed to shift it to online due to some public health agency restrictions. They gave us some recommendations not to have gathering, so we needed to shift it online. So to give you a brief overview of how this discussion will go, we will start by 90-minute discussion with the panelists, and then we will open the floor for the Q&A from the audience. So meanwhile, you can post your questions in the chat. And we need to tell you that this event will be recorded. So if you want to participate by your voice, so that you are admitting that we can use this recording and publish it online. Any questions, any feedback, any comments, you can post it in the chat during the discussion. So let's begin this interesting discussion. It's about AI and research. When you usually hear the word AI, what comes to our mind? Image recognition, home assistant devices, video games. AI comes to data analysis in social media, in ads and websites, in wearable devices, in voice search tools. What comes to our mind? AI in computer science, maximum in robotics. But actually, AI is penetrating in other fields, in medicine, in engineering, in security, finance, education, space, politics. We don't talk about politics. Biology, art and architecture, weather forecast, business and marketing. It's almost everywhere. So to discuss this and where it is going, is it taking over the research? We have 5 panelists today. We are honored to discuss with them this topic. And we will introduce them, starting with Peter Underbird. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Peter is a professor in health science at the University of Skövde and in applied health technology at Belking Institute of Technology. He leads several research projects in the area of health and technology, with particular interest in the development of technology and services for older people, and how decision support with AI and deep learning could be used in health context. So interesting. And then we are honored to have Amos in.
Hello, everyone.
Amos is a professor in production and automation engineering at the University of Skövde. He has been conducting research and teaching in Faculty of Physics, production simulation, simulation-based optimization, particularly the applications of multi-objective simulation, optimization for production system design, analysis, and improvement. His current research interest lies in combining multidisciplinary simulation and AI-based perspective in supporting decision-making in manufacturing, service, and healthcare domains. Awesome, Amos. And we're also honored to have Jane Senergan. who is an associate professor in bioinformatics at the University of Skövde. Her background is in data science. Her research is focused on analysis methods for identification of biomarkers and integration of multiple types of omics data. She is the PI for several research projects, specialized in stem cells, differentiation, toxicity testing, disease modeling, and regenerative medicine using stem cells based in vitro systems. She is leading projects particularly focused on advanced analysis of big data, biomarker identification, and data integration. Sounds so exciting. We also have Jorgen Hansen.
Good evening, everyone.
Jorgen Hansen is a professor in informatics at the University of Skövde. He has held professor positions at Chalmers and Linköping University, and has been senior researcher and manager at Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. He is the co-founder of the Software Research Center at Chalmers. His research area includes safety critical system, software architecture, and dependability aspects. So amazing. And finally, we have Nikolas Corrensis. He's a professor in predictive analysis and analytics at the University of Skövde. He is researching various areas of time series modeling, business forecasting, using AI, economics, and statistics. His research interests includes model specification, combination and uncertainty, loss functions, hierarchical forecasting, and temporal aggregation. So beautiful. Welcome, everybody. So to begin this discussion, Peter, can you tell us how did you come to this AI field? So you were in health and then you came to AI, or AI came to you, or how did you came together?
I started out as an engineer and did my engineering studies in electrical engineering and with a touch of computer science at Lund Institute of Technology, and also did my PhD there. And I was always working sort of trying to find application of technology in human context, and early on became interested in the health and welfare sector. So it floated into that, and with my background, the digitalization of society as a whole, but specifically within the healthcare setting and also in the welfare setting, made me sort of float in to see all the different tools that was available. And AI is, of course, and increasingly so, one of the most interesting tools to help us cope with the welfare system and the healthcare system in the future. Since we all know that we have a demographic change in the number of older people, and the number of people seeking care is nowhere possible to handle just by increasing the size of the sector with more people. So it's widely understood and widely advertised that AI is the magic wand that will help us with this in the future. However, we haven't seen that much in practicality. I can come back to that later, but basically my interest in my is the application of various kinds of AI tools, machine learning tools in this area, and to see how this could improve and make healthcare sustainability in the future. So, and I guess during 90 minutes I can come back to it in more specific terms.
Yeah, we have
basically, yeah, basically that is how I floated into this. Being with my background, I'm of course interested in algorithm maximization, but that is not the bulk of my work
okay,
today.
thank you, Peter. And then Amos, how does simulation comes to AI? Can you tell us more about what you do?
I think there is one aspect of AI is the prediction part. And then simulation simply fulfill the prediction part, but instead of only train a model to get a predictive model, we use simulations. I think mainly as an understanding of the logic and the flow of the system to build a model. But then I think the simulation model can also be combined with other AI trained model, or even to train other AI model. I think this is a very simple view of how simulation and AI are connected or can be combined.
Sounds cool. And Jane, you work in biology, bioinformatics, and you have background in computer science. How did you end up in this position? If you can unmute yourself, please, you are muted.
Yes, sorry. First time I came across AI was during my undergraduate studies 20 years ago. And I was already at that time passionate about the possibilities with these techniques. But I didn't really have the chance to dig into that at that time point. By different coincidences, I ended up focusing on stem cell research, and I was and am very fascinated about that. We have worked with the large-scale data analysis for quite some time now, and rather recently we have focused our research group on AI-based methods in life science, and I think that will make tremendous changes in the next few years, actually.
Mm-hmm. And Jorgen, you work with software engineering.
So I came in contact with AI 20 years ago as well, part of my studies, but my research work as of late has been on software architecture and scheduling aspects in safety critical systems. So so that my work has been in heuristic algorithms, and some AI techniques are heuristics, have used neural networks to predict workloads into the system and see if that is a better way of scheduling things, because neural networks has a constant cost in order to make decisions. These days, I'm not working in AI at all, but being on the board of a funding agency, we are looking into strategic areas very often to see where we want to launch research programs. So I'm watching it closely from a research point of view, but more into what are the hot topics and where are we making the most progress and where can it be applied.
Interesting. And Nikolas, you deal with a little bit sensitive stuff like financial. When money talks, things become dangerous. How did you came into this position?
I think for my case, it's a bit of a strange story. So I think I should give a bit of my background. So although now I'm into predictive modeling, analytics, and AI mainly in my research, initially I studied strategic management. And for me, the issue was like, how do we take decisions, or what decisions should we take, rather than the details? And in some sense, I moved more and more into mathematical research because I was like, okay, I can ask the questions, but I have no idea how to solve them. But one thing that's always was striking for me was that if we think about statistical analysis or simplified mathematical analysis, we have to impose multiple assumptions there. And early on, I would say roughly 20 years ago for myself as well, one of the opportunities I saw in AI was that perhaps we can lift all these assumptions. Perhaps we can actually work with the full complexity of our problems and still get some reasonable answers. So that's what attracted me, if you wish, to then at some point in my PhD say, let's do everything in AI. And since then, well, more and more.
Yeah, sounds good. Peter mentioned the word magical tool referring to AI. So Jane, does the field in your area in bioinformatics sees it as the magical tool as well, or how does the field perceive it?
Yeah, there's a lot of expectations on AI, but there is also a lot of challenges when it comes to the health care system and also life science research in general. So I wouldn't say that people see it as a magic tool, although most have high expectations of what will come out when we have worked on this a little bit more, learned more how to apply it, learn more about the challenges that actually are solvable by AI, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And Amos, does the field in simulation sees it as a magical tool as well, or how does it perceive AI? You in person and field in general.
I think I can represent more on the domain that I have more experience is the industrial applications, manufacturing, and also other type of industry. I think somehow people still see this as a more like a buzzword. Of course, as Jane mentioned, I think there are always expectations, but somehow I think the understanding of the people about the technology and what kind of data it will require, I think is still quite a big challenge. So that I think the expectation is higher than what can deliver at this stage. And then it's the same for simulation technology. I think people also have a quite high expectation, but at the same time, I think the understanding there is still somehow limited. That's why I think it prohibits a little bit about the wide spread of the technologies. So there are always companies that will successful, but I think in general, I think people still are lacking some understanding about what the technology require in terms of the type of data and also the way how the data should be collected, and then even how to analyze the data with which type of algorithms and so on.
And Jorgen, you are more close into software engineering, which is close to AI. So do you have more realistic vision about?
Well, in the area I'm working is safety critical systems. So in that area, the companies, they're looking closely at AI, but for the time being, in order to integrate AI safely in those kind of systems, some things have to happen in the software architecture because as long as we have a hard time proving the correctness of an AI system, we need to figure out ways of containing how the decisions are being made by the AI system. So in this context, I see AI as something that you apply, but our work in software engineering essentially consists of 3 dimensions. And the first one, which is the first generation, is essentially integrating AI techniques into the software. One could then think about how to use AI techniques when we're developing software. For example, trying to use those in order to analyze the software development, looking for where we predict there to be errors in the software before we're releasing the software to the market. For example, you could look at the complexity of functions and try to see the dependencies between components. The third would be quite interesting to, for example, have AI techniques in the user interface where you adapt to the independent user. But I think that is pretty far down the road, but it's all being applied.
Yeah, Nikolas, you also work on critical field. How does the field perceive AI?
I think at least in predictive analytics, AI is a bit overused and overhyped. You see a lot of times software companies coming up from nowhere and saying we have an AI solution for all your problems. Well, it may as well be, but the problem is that often, at least in analytics, you see AI being used as a sledgehammer for every problem. And that's not useful, I would say. There are a lot of cases where it's very useful, but there are a lot of cases that much simpler techniques, much more transparent techniques can do their job. And I'm not saying it as a critique for AI, I'm more saying it as a critique for both researchers and users to not using AI to its full potential and often using it to do something overly simplistic, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I agree. And Peter, back to your point as the magical tool, what would you say about it in healthcare?
I think that the point that Jane made is interesting. So maybe I should go a bit even deeper. I think that it is more from the political and from the outsider's perspective that it's seen as a magical tool, something that will solve any and all problems that we might have in the future. Within the healthcare sector, I would say that there is maybe sometimes quite the opposite. I share, if you see this, it says, for those of you who are not in Swedish, that this is a researcher, Martin Salo, that have been a bit critic now. He put on Twitter that everyone says that AI will save healthcare, and then he clips in something that happened in Scotland where the AI camera, they didn't use cameraman. So, and it followed the bald linesman instead. It took his head for the ball and followed him throughout the whole game. So this started off a discussion rather than, okay, look at this, how bad AI is. Everyone's saying that this is going to solve the healthcare problems for us, but really it's just doing a lot of mistakes. I mean, we can only rely on people all the time. So to say this, I say that we are somewhere in between this. This hype and this really grand vision of how AI is going to solve everything, and then you have this skepticism, especially among healthcare professionals, that well, it won't, because people is much better. And there is a very interesting thing here, because when you discuss that, you're always comparing all the mistakes that the technology makes with the perfect human. But we know that 110,000 people are damaged by different kinds of actual mistakes that we're making, and we are actually killing off 1,400 people in healthcare every year on human mistakes. So bringing it back to a more realistic vision, what AI actually could conceive, and doing this and trying to put together these very diametrically opposing views on AI as something that will just screw up the life for the healthcare professionals and for the lifesaver. I think that is what we're closing in. We're seeing a lot of very interesting applications where we're actually now being able to use that decision support system. And I could tell a bit more about them later.
Nice. So many of you brought this point of AI. Is it useful? Is it not? Is it used just because it's an AI, or is it used because we need it? And before we go deeper in this discussion, we will ask the audience. We have a poll. So everyone, now you can see the poll, which says, do we really need AI in other fields? Other fields, we mean medicine, economy, education, and so. And we have either, yes, we need it. It brings new solutions, or to some extent, it resolves problem in a fancy way, or no, it's just a trend. People do it just because it's a trend. So we have 30 seconds to answer this question. And we will see what our audience think. Wow. So 50% of people think that yes, we need AI. It brings new solutions in different fields, while almost 40% says to some extent, so it brings some fancy solutions. And some people say, no, it's just a trend. So how would you comment on this?
So Jorgen, so I think that there is a lot of potential with AI, and so, but we're taking the first steps on how to actually apply it. But one has to realize artificial intelligence just means artificial. It doesn't mean they're smart AI. They can very well be stupid AI, but everyone seems to assume that it is smart. But what we are seeing now is we're trying to use it in various contexts in order to take the next step. As of now, we are looking at it from very, very specific applications points of view. But this
Can you mute? Can the audience? Yes, sorry. Sorry, you are muted. Peter, you are muted. Jorgen, sorry.
Someone else muted me. It was not me.
Sorry, yeah.
So as any other technology, you see that there is a hot trend. Everyone is looking at it because of that there is a potential. There are research funding coming into it, and there is a point in order to pick it up quickly. But this is not different from any other technology that has been around the block. It has been the same thing for algorithms at one point in time. It has been the same thing for database technology. When we had expert system, everyone was into that. So we have to realize what is happening now is trying to realize the potential as much as possible and get as many brains into that problem and try to understand which application fields do we find have the highest potential. And at some point we have to realize that the fad will actually also fade away a bit, and that's okay.
Yeah, any other comments by the others? You can jump in the discussion.
I can add a bit to that. I think Jorgen very correctly said AI it has the artificial part for a good reason. I think people expect far too much from AI. It's very common for me when I talk with industry that they tell me, oh, we can do an AI solution here, right? And of course, they have no idea what that really means. To put it very simple, any model, any mathematical model will do what you train it to do. It has a loss function. You tell it to be very good at predicting some data by fitting well to the data. You don't train it by saying, get this data, but I want you to be good at doing another decision. And that is exactly where AI often can get misunderstood, but also I think it's its greatest potential in some sense. Currently, we say, take some data, and well, if the question is related to that data, AI can do a pretty good job right now. But that's something that we can do with many other approaches. And as Jorgen said before, it's another tool. It's a technology we learn to understand how to use and how to implement. When we ask AI to make a decision that is not related to the data, then it gets really difficult. But not impossible, mind you. And this is where all the research is, I think, potentially, we have a few bright years in front of us in AI research if we manage to realize exactly that ability of the AI systems to help us taking decisions that are not directly connected to the data we gave it. If you wish to put it simple, researchers or practitioners, or no matter how you see, people offering their services, they are still creative. Is AI creative? I leave it as a question mark. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. Depends on how do you define creativity. Yeah. Any other comments? So why do we really have this overrated view in some fields? So besides just being a technology tool and it is used and it is like we have high expectations, are there any other reasons why we over rely on it? Could it be because we are using big terms? So we are claiming that we have an intelligence that is artificially created. And then we are using big terms like deep learning. So we claim that the machine is learning deeply. Is this one of the solution of the causes? Are there any other causes?
I think that there are technical developments. They go through the same phases. I think artificial intelligence has a bit of a different position in this regard, because the general purpose, or the general man, the general layman, can relate to what intelligence is. So when we're putting artificial intelligence out there, and we have movies like The Matrix, and we have Asimov's book on all the levels of AI and how robots behave, then somehow then it becomes an interesting case for the general layman. In that sense, you see a societal interest. So it doesn't mean that the general layman understand the potential of it or how we're going about it. But I think that is how this area might possibly stand out.
Yes. Any comments by you, Peter or Amos? Is it the same in your field?
I think if I jump in here, I mean, there are expectations about this kind of a silver bullet. What I mean is people expect some sort of a black box solutions. That means like you just throw in your problem and then you get a magical solutions. I think this is quite general, not only in industry, but maybe in other business. But I pretty agree with what Nikolas mentioned about there are always some company want to sell their solution as some sort of silver bullet. That means just give us your problem and then we can solve it with our new AI engine. I start to talk about this buzzword, but in manufacturing, I think there is one field called it maintenance. I think you will get more benefit from AI, but the reason was because of like predicting when the machine will break down. I think people have been starting to doing it for many, many years, 30 years, with very simple algorithm, and then later with neural network and so on. So, but what we can observe is those algorithms that are very successful in solving the problem, they are highly customized and sometimes even need to have a deep knowledge from some expert to embed into the algorithm instead of just some magical spot, magical box. So that's why I think I don't believe this kind of general solutions that can solve problems, general AI solution. But I believe this kind of a highly customized AI solutions can be very new way to solve some old problem. That's how I see it.
Yes, and then basically this is what I was talking a bit about before, the expectations that could differ from, if you look from who you are speaking to, those who are close to the tools that, and close to the problems that is going to be solved. And now also healthcare professionals have seen a lot of technological tools during the years where companies and others have promised them a lot but not delivered in that. So the skepticism is probably there's a reason for that. But I mean, it's as basically I hear everyone saying here that I mean, it's not a tool for everything, and it certainly is not a magic wand. I mean, it's a very good technology for solving specific tasks and doing it very well today. For example, if we look at the image recognition and the area that has been really big for a while now, looking at analyzing images and handling a lot of data. I mean, you can already today see that you are faster and better than many radiologists, for example. So that is an area where you could start and where you could actually use it as a decision support tool for these groups. So we have some success cases. There wasn't a report from the National Board of Health last year, just in almost exactly a year now, when they looked at this and they said that the use of AI and healthcare in Sweden is very limited. There's a lot of research in the area, but only a few minor applications are used now. But still, all this research and all this looking at the technology as a tool in practice will, of course, eventually lead to various kinds of tools that will help the professionals in their daily life. So it's both a promise not delivered, but if we look at what is actually being used today, it's rather amazing and really good anyway. So
yeah,
you can look at it from both perspectives.
Yes.
May I comment on that?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that in some areas it's harder than others. If you're building a medical device and you're using AI, it will be interesting to see how organization like the American FDA, how they are going to verify and validate the correct behavior and approve that medical devices are allowed to use within that area. So time will tell. Same thing for aviation industry.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same for car industry because they don't have a lot of these regulations or verification and validation authorities.
Hmm. And Jane, is it the same in bioinformatics?
Yeah, I agree completely to what Jorgen said there about the regulations. That will be a great challenge to solve how the validation is going to be. Today, even expert doctors come up with different diagnoses, and how should you sort of rely on what the AI-based system come up with when it is so many things that you don't really know about. But when it comes to biology, I think it also poses fantastic possibilities, because biology in itself is it's a very, very complex system with lots of dependencies, and it's so complex, so it's not even possible for a human being to understand the whole picture. And using AI as a tool to sort of derive nonlinear dependencies between different molecules will really be a great tool to advance research and to learn more about how disease develop, make prognosis based on the status that you have right now. What prognosis do you have to develop a certain disease and so on? So, yeah.
Yeah, you all brought this perspective of there is a danger when we bring AI into the field. Sometimes it's because overrated, sometimes because it doesn't fulfill the expectations of the industry. And sometimes it's used like by the press when they say machine learning claims that this will not happen, or machine learning claims that this medicine is proved. And you use the word machine learning to just give an authority or to give like credibility for what we say. What is the danger in this?
I don't see much danger. I think it is an exaggerated view. There is yet to find any evidence that things like that will happen. It's not like an AI algorithm in a car will try to understand what the driver wants, and he's like, the driver is not happy with his neighbor. It's not like that car will try to please the driver and try to hit the neighbor when it's backing out the car from the garage. So there is an exaggeration because you can make it into a sensational case. But AI techniques can fault in the same way as any other kind of software. So it's not that it's fault-free. The question will be, is it more prone to faults than any other technology? And that's why people are working on trying to find the evidence that these systems are that you can prove that they are correct.
If I may jump in here, the discussions.
Yes.
I think I heard Peter use a term quite interesting. He talked about supporting decision maker. I think when you talk about danger, for me, I think there are different components of the AI. So if you're talking about prediction, so there is a book called Prediction Machines by a bundle of Canadian economics and IT professors. They talk about AI is just cheaper and more accurate prediction. I think as far as we talk about this is only prediction and then give some decision makers some support. I think that is one part of AI. But the general trend is to have the AI even to take over the decision making. So I think if you talk about danger, then I would see that will be more ethical discussions about what happens if AI start to take over the decision-making part, not only about the prediction part. So this is one part that I think is more interesting to discuss about it.
Yeah, I think.
So maybe there in certain areas you can evaluate the decision that the AI system is proposing, and you could have a fail-safe decision algorithm in the background to say maybe it's not the best decision that you get with the traditional algorithm, but you can still evaluate the decision coming out of an AI solution. And that's how you build safety critical system. You try to contain and see and evaluate what is coming out. We do that redundancy architecture, and then AI could be one component for that.
Yes, Peter?
Yes, and this is basically what I was talking about before also, and that's the comment that I made on how we actually can use it as a support system. That is rather the factor that could help us from, because it is very regulated, and if we should let the technology in to take the final decision, then we would be in trouble. But as I said before, the human brain is actually not that perfect, if anyone thought so. So we are actually only helping with various decision support to do these decisions better. Because I mean, take for example, if I would probably not trust, or maybe I should say too much now, but if the machine regulates my medication in an area where it's not very well proven, but if you have technology telling you, well, are you really want to prescribe this combination of medication because we've seen before that this could go wrong, then you still have it as a you can use what technology is good at the moment to calculate and do a lot of fast statistics, and then feedback it to you. But still you have the human creativity, or the human possibility of weighing in various factors. So this will also, I think that this is the future for quite some time to come for AI, at least in the sector and the domain that I can overlook, the healthcare sector. So yes, I don't see those dangers. I think that they are a bit. I mean, it's the same as before. Hollywood like things that scare you, and the media like to scare you, and they of course look into these factors because they are more interesting.
True. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You wanted to say something, Jane?
Yeah, connected to what Peter just talked about, I don't see danger either. The only danger I can come up with right now is if we see these decision support systems coming up at the internet as AI doctors, then I would see a danger, because then it's uncontrolled. And I think that AI as a support system together with the doctor's expertise would be a perfect or very powerful diagnosis support. But standalone applications that are not controlled can really make big disasters instead. So that is maybe a danger that can come with this. However, I see also a lot of potential, because not everything in our sector is about diagnosis and prognosis. We also do research regarding development of disease, as I mentioned before, and we would like to use it as a hypothesis generator to come up with new ideas of potential causes of disease, for example. And then it's not a danger at all, then, because these hypotheses will be tested in using different other validation techniques. So there we just get new ideas by the help of AI.
Yeah, thank you. And Nikolas, you want to say something?
Yeah, I can add a few things here, and potentially quite relevant given that this is arranged by the PhD community. I think there is an ethical aspect to the use of AI. It's a powerful tool. There is no saying against that. It's also, I see it as an equalizer. Many companies or many research groups or many actors in any fashion can use AI tools to solve problems that before they had no access to them. For instance, natural language processing. If you just think how much more powerful translating tools have become over the years, me now living in Sweden and having to learn the language, I face it every day. This is AI in practice. And this is where it shows that, even if I have no idea how to write the translation software, I can download the free library and write translation software from scratch. And then I can either do it as a free service or as a paid service or whatever. Now, this is very different from saying a doctor or something else. But here is exactly the point that I want to make. Translating software, even if it gets it wrong, the cost of it is very low for society. Getting a diagnosis wrong, then the cost starts increasing. Having self-driving cars that keep killing people, that's again a high cost. Having self-driving cars that pick their own music for your driving taste, that's not really a cost. But up to a point, isn't it up to society to sort of get more and more used to these approaches being implemented? There is a well-known psychology effect, if you wish, algorithm aversion, some people have dubbed it. I don't like this term myself, but this is how literature likes to call it, where, when you have a mathematical model failing in one way or another, people can become very critical about it. But when we fail as humans, it's okay, we're humans. Yet the algorithm or the AI or whatever, it was developed by a human as well. So I don't necessarily see why do we get these different perspectives. But my point here being is it dangerous? Well, if it's used unethically, like any tool, it can be very dangerous. We don't have to go too far away if we think about modern tools like microtransactions, or if you wish in financial investments, this very ultra high frequency trading that essentially has made financial tools almost non-approachable, let's say, to normal people. Is that ethical or unethical? I won't go there, but it's not AI, and it's a big problem. Is AI in itself dangerous? No. Is unethical use of AI dangerous? Surely it can be. Are we doing enough to educate people in the general populace, in universities and industry, how to not make such mistakes? Well, this is a PhD forum, so I would say at least we're on the right path.
Well, we will throw the ball to Peter and Amos here. So how do you see this? Yes, Peter, go first.
Yes, this is very interesting, and this ethical perspective, and also I agree with both Jane and Nikolas that this is something that we should discuss. But I would also like to flip it a bit, because I mean, of course, a bad decision support system is dangerous, but even if it's a bit faulty, but it's better than nothing. I mean, you could have quite simple system. Could be a help to people who don't have any access to other healthcare. There are a lot of people all over the world who do not have access to healthcare or any doctor or anything. Would it then be better for them to have? I'm not saying it is. I'm posing it as a question. Wouldn't it then be better to have some sort of rather rudimentary and maybe not fully optimized, but better than nothing system that they could access? Because this could democratize healthcare in a way. We are looking at it a bit West world centric when we discuss these things. So for me, it's also interesting to see what is the trade-off? What is the optimization? Where does it become better than nothing, or even worse? I mean, there are a lot of really bad advice around from other people in different kinds of social media and stuff like that. So this is for me a bit talking for AI, because rightly done, these AI systems could sort of elicit information from scientific articles and PM written by other doctors and stuff like that. So I'm just putting that in as the opposing ethical perspective to the one that you took and that I agree with.
Yes, and Jorgen, you had a point.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to agree with Jane and Nikolas and Peter before, because they said, I said about the danger, but they all addressed a danger which had to do with the use of it. And I fully agree with that. But I also think that the challenge is how well the end user will actually use an AI system, because they might not be able to evaluate how mature the technology is. But when it comes to developers, they should have the professional judgment and act ethically and not let poor systems out the door. And so that's why they go through verification and validation. But it's not the first time we're seeing technology that is hard to predict. Control theory has been an area that has been around for quite some time. And we have a number of mathematical models that are predicting the decision, for example, in an airplane, which is fly by wire, but it does not necessarily always get it right. So thinking about the JAS fighter jet, then that one crashed, went into the ground because of an error in the control theoretical model for steering the plane. Or so yeah, the end user has a large responsibility, but maybe it's hard for them to do it because hard to evaluate. The developer has a huge responsibility not launch products that might not be up to the standard that we expect.
Yeah, well said, Jorgen. And Amos, you wanted to add something?
I think I have certain response to what Nikolas talked about is why people usually have a more criticism against this fault by AI. But if we continue to follow this healthcare aspect, which is somehow also outside my domain, I think there is a book called the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. I think the author is quite well known, Yuval Harari. I think maybe many of you have read the book called Homo Sapien. I think he has given a very interesting example about, today a good doctors may say that, okay, after I check these 10 scientific papers, so this probably is the best treatment for certain patients. But when we talk about AI, then maybe the AI engine can scan about millions of scientific papers and then find out the best treatment. And then here, he mentioned that the advantage of having the AI as the doctor, making the diagnostics and also giving the treatment, is that let's say that if somehow the World Health Organization has implemented a new policy, then just like this just spread to all these AI doctors and they will follow this to the very single letter. But the human doctors cannot do it. But at the same time, the drawback will be if there is a single fault, maybe not bug, but a single fault in this kind of system, then the disaster will be much more widespread than some single doctors making some mistake. So I can imagine the more widespread the technology is, more people adopt it, then of course I think people will expect it to be less faultless. So I think this is somehow my response to what Nikolas mentioned. But I also want to know this example, what's the response from Peter and also Jane about this kind of AI doctor that can be more scientific to give us diagnostics and also treatment recommendations.
Good. So we talked
about... first,
Yes.
Do you want to start, Jane, by doing a bit? Because I mean, I would say that basically I think that it seems like we are almost all in accordance. A bit too much, maybe. Maybe you should put in something, Sarah, so to make us more disagree on this. But I mean,
sometimes we put the fault on the user end, while as Hansen said, as it's also the developer, or let's say the researchers. So us, we have.
Jorgen, it was obvious that it was a bad pilot who didn't understand the brilliant technology that they had done in JAWS that made it crash. No.
So a big fault relies on the researchers, us.
Yeah, Well,
and how we tune this technology and the direction of the technology and how it goes into the field. But usually we say that we are researchers are just simple people who are just innocent. So he's directing us.
I really don't know if I should answer that now when it is recorded and everything. So maybe
if we put the fault on conferences and funding resources, to what extent would those push the direction of the research? But before we answer this, let's ask the audience. So to ask the audience, to what extent do you think funding agencies and conference teams impact the direction of the field of AI? So we have 30 seconds to answer this question. Wow, so the majority says that funding and conferences highly affects the direction of the field. How would you comment on this? Take into consideration the ethics issues as well. So conferences accepts what's ethical and non-ethical, and to what extent would that affect?
I'm not
I can start with that. I think it's surely, I mean, we are supposed to figure out funding to be able to do research, have healthy groups and so on. So whether we like it or not, this is the reality of how research is done internationally. It's not only for Sweden, it's for everywhere. And surely when industry and society sees AI as one of the areas where we have to understand more, do more research or produce more research to production of use or research to consumption solutions, then surely it's well-deserved money for the research. Now, one aspect I would say, though, that I find a bit strange in some sense, we all of us made the point that we need to understand what AI is so we can use it properly, or we can comment properly about it. You know, you made before the argument about journalists potentially using AI as the boogeyman or the boogie woman, whatever would be the right term here. And I agree with that. But this is a lack of education, perhaps, or a lack of understanding. And it's maybe not fair to ask from everybody to have equally deep understanding. But personally, from my experience standing in various PhD committees, I have been at times a bit critical of students who were not from a field that was, let's say, knowledgeable about AI or machine learning, yet they were making a lot of predictions and statements how AI or machine learning would change their field. That, I think, is a mistake. And that is something that is, again, connected to the funding, because it shouldn't be AI or nothing. It should be that AI is yet another way to do our job. And in that sense, I would argue that, yes, AI saves funding, but it shouldn't necessarily be seen as a very narrow saving. It shouldn't be I either research how to do something with AI or nothing.
Although we will come to the student part later, but do you think that using AI in our research increase the probability of getting funding? What do you think?
So I would like to answer on that. So the funding, so think about the funding agency. They do two types of programs essentially. One that is very thematically focused on AI these days. Why? Because they want to accelerate the use and the development of AI techniques. But there are many other thematic programs where you can get funding, where it's not impossible to use AI. So some will use AI, some won't. But those will be the primary funding opportunities for using AI once the AI area is slowing down. But at this point, we're in an acceleration phase. So it's not surprising to me that the funding agencies are trying to push that. Look at Keiki Foundation, our national funding agency. They have no requirements on AI, and they don't launch programs in that, but that doesn't prohibit the use of AI research.
And how is it in your field, Jane? Does using AI increase the probability of getting funding? Being accepted in papers?
I would say probably on that question. Yeah, depending on where you apply for funds, of course. So as Jorgen said, the KK Foundation doesn't have any requirement, but I mean, you need to develop an interesting approach for solving a problem. Then, and AI is a hype, then it's very close that you actually include it in some parts of your project description. So at this time point, I think that for many funding agencies, you increase your success rate if you include at least part of it.
Yeah, so we can claim that including AI in our field would increase the probability of getting funding and accepting papers. Would that take us back to the point of we are just squeezing AI so that to get this stuff?
I didn't say to get papers published, but just grant opportunities in my comment.
Can we say that funding sources are pushing AI somehow?
Yeah, they are, because they, as Jorgen mentioned, they want this field to develop more rapidly, and this is a steering tool for them to actually achieve that. So I don't think it's strange, and I don't think it's wrong either. I think it's a good tool to direct where we are going to put our efforts at the moment.
And how would you comment about that, Peter?
I think it's good. I'm a bit orthodox in academia. I think that academia should be self-regulatory, and to some big extent, we always need a lot of research in an area to filter out, to see what are the ways. So that's the purpose, to some extent, of research, looking at what works and what does not work. So I think a massive funding to this could be good, but I would rather go back and also say I don't see that it's in all areas is an advantage. I see that some areas there are still a bit skepticism, and I think that it may be a good thing. I think that it should be, as somebody said here, that it should be looked upon as the tool it is. Is it relevant? I mean, is it the hammer that you, if you have a nail that you want, or is it if it's a screw, then probably you should not advertise AI just because it's a buzzword or it's a hype around it at the moment. So
yeah, would you like to comment about that, Amos?
I think my view is a bit closer to Nikolas, and I don't think even for the manufacturing, industrial engineering field, you will gain better advantage to tell that your paper is about AI. And then when talking about funding agency, you know, today, most of those proposals are will be peer reviewed. And then, you know, the other experts, they will not be just like checking that, okay, you have AI and then you have advantage. And then I think my view more closer to Nikolas is, I think it's just because of AI become more like a buzzword. I think more reviewers will really look into the contents to see exactly what kind of contributions, no matter is the application domain by applying the AI technology or the AI technology itself. So I don't think by just using AI as a buzzword will give you any advantage. Maybe nowadays, maybe just like the reverse, maybe you need to even understand deeper about your problem when you form your proposal. This is how I see it, or like your papers. This is how I see it.
And coming from different countries, all of you are coming from different areas around the world. Have you seen any difference in this between countries?
Probably being one of the most recently arrived in Sweden, I can start with that. I think most countries face the same question. Some countries who have a bit of a, how to say, better tradition in research, they are a bit further ahead in that question. I would argue that Sweden is in the same boat on that. some countries that are a bit more lack of focus, I would say, in research. They're doing more of trying to catch up game. But there is an element that maybe goes a bit to the previous question and potentially answers this question now. Some of the questions we're trying to address in research are so difficult and so big that they cannot be resolved by a small team or by one or two academics in one university. They require consortia that go beyond one country, beyond industry. So if you really want to tackle these big questions, you have to actually figure out first a very interesting question. And AI there as a buzzword will not do it. You will need to actually use it in a way that is useful for addressing the question. It may be even the topic of the research, but it has to have a very good research question in itself. And if that exists, the consortium then can happen as well. Now, which one happens first? Difficult to say. I wouldn't say there is a better way or a worse way. But after that, identifying international funding is typically reasonable. I will not use the word easy because it's never easy to get funding, but surely if you start with a good research question and with the international buying on the research problem, that surely demonstrates that it's a current issue for multiple stakeholders. And that's a good start to be.
Yeah, how would you comment about this? Does anyone want to comment about how this affects? Yeah. Anyone want to share how different countries affect the funding thing? Coming from different perspectives, coming from different backgrounds?
I don't have an opinion about that. I know too little about, but what we can see is that some of these things are happening at a European level when it comes to thematic programs.
That's true, but then also I agree with you. I don't know enough about it, but I see that, for example, the last Horizon 2020 round, they had a particular calls for the AI in health, for example. So there it was sort of the basis for the application should be that you included AI in some way or another. And
And that is also what I meant with increasing the opportunities to get funding. That is the number of calls that include AI. The proportion is much larger now than 5 years ago. So if you calculate the proportion of AI-based calls and add on the proportion of COVID-19 based calls now, then the proportion of calls that doesn't include these two topics are quite small. So therefore, I still think that you should consider if it suits your research, then it may be a good idea.
so the advice for all the young researchers out there is to do an AI with COVID-19 proposal. Then you're sure to get funded.
Oh yeah, you need some expertise in the field as well.
Okay, that too. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about junior researchers, or let's say students who wants to enter the field of AI, whether they are coming from computer science background or whether they have another field background, medicine, financial, or other. What are the challenges that a student may face to enter the field? So Jane, you were in computer science and then you went to bioinformatics. What kind of challenges have you faced?
In bioinformatics or life science, I would say one of the challenges is really to get access to the amount of data and the data that is appropriate for AI-based algorithms, to get access to that. But recent development of technology in life science has really opened up these possibilities quite dramatically. So I would say that the possibilities will increase. For example, single cell analysis has opened up a possibility to get lots of samples from one experiment that can add up to be useful for AI-based training.
And Nikolas, coming from a background that you said it was business and financial, and then you came into the analytics. How would you perceive it?
I think I was lucky that I did it early enough. I don't know how I would dare to do it right now, to be honest. But there is
say that a student is in your position and is facing this challenge to enter the field of AI. What are the challenges?
There is a serious point to it, because I think currently you cannot afford to not know what AI is. You may not need to know all the details. You may not need to understand the algorithms in its totality, but at least you need to be aware of what it actually can do and how it can be used, even if you're not an AI researcher at all. It's like telling someone, should you know statistics? To the very basic level, yes, this is what AI has become now. It's just a tool that we will have and use for whatever we do. It's a methodology for this. Now, if you want to go more into the details of the AI, well, I would say that, can I even count myself as being that? Arguably, I would say no. And in what sense? In the sense that every year there is so much research produced by both public and corporate bodies in AI that it's extremely difficult to be on top of the field. However, it is very possible to be on top of a niche area of the field. And often that's good enough. And that's where you need collaborators, network, essentially a good team to work with you, because you cannot be top on everything. And as an advice to past PhDs of mine, I would say it's always good to focus to something that is actually interesting. First of all, for you to be motivated, and secondly, for the field, because then it's also publishable. So I think that this is a good starting point. But and you know, obviously, you know, if it's daunting for someone who's been doing in the field for the last 20 years to feel that you're on top of it, it's surely daunting for a student, and that's okay. That's part of being a researcher.
You brought an interesting point. So you said that AI is almost like statistics. Would that tell us that maybe PhD students in all fields need to have a course, program course in AI? But before we jump into this, let's ask the audience. Or maybe Peter want to share something?
No, I just had that picture, so no, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we want to ask the audience whether they see that we should have a course in AI in each PhD program in all disciplines. So you have 30 seconds to answer this question. So we see that many people agree that we have a course in AI in the PhD program in all disciplines. How would you comment on this?
If I may start?
Yes, please.
Then I definitely think so, because I think that before we've said that we only those who are doing quantitative research would do statistic courses, and those who are doing qualitative does not necessarily have to do it. But I think that by using this as, because now we're talking a bit about a different thing. We're not talking about the application of AI in the domain. We are talking about it to some extent, I understand, as a research tool.
Yes.
And that is two fundamentally different things. But as a research tool, I think it would become increasingly important, because as somebody mentioned here before, I mean, just to keep track of all the research that is done today is almost impossible. I mean, doing a reasonable systematic literature review to start off with would be, of course, aided very much with having good tools to do this. And I mean, now with all the natural language processing tools that are existing, you could also do it in other areas. So I think that I would definitely say that it will be. I mean, and maybe we are talking about healthcare professionals are in risk of losing their job to AI. I mean, researchers would probably go first, and journalists, because I mean, a lot of the things that we do and spend a lot of time with could quite easily be done by computers. But it's the actual interpretation of this and to make sense of this data. So I would say that I would surely force all my coming PhD students to take a class in this.
Yeah, any other follow-up comment on whether we need to have an AI course in all disciplines?
So I do disagree. I would agree with the supervisor in certain areas that they would strongly advise, or as Peter says, that he wants all of his students to do a course in AI. But I'm not sure what we would achieve with that. That's force feeding a technology that is hot right now, but then we should force feed any kind of critical technology. Then we should force feed software technology. We should force feed algorithms. We should force feed, and well, you continue the list that is critical to any kind of software system development, and we don't do that. But I strongly advise a PhD student, given where we are in research at large, that if they're interested in that they do take a course in that area. But I think that it is an opportune time for the universities to actually provide a number of courses in this very important area.
Just a brief comment back
Yes.
to that. I of course took the extreme position just to for the sake of argument, but I would say that it's not as any other technology. The thing is that now today that there are, I mean, most of you have probably seen the iris.ai site with all the research tool. So I would say that the difference between this technology and other research technologies is that it is an extremely and increasingly important research tool for young researchers to learn to get ahead of the area. So that is basically why I say that I think that the time is right now for anyone to know this. I mean, because before we taught statistics to anyone doing some sort of quantitative research and more qualitative methods to those doing qualitative research. But here, I would say that a basis to get a hold of the area, those tools are actually existing today. And that is why I see it as a future obligatoire for all research students.
Yes, Amos?
My view, of course, I think it depends on the research topic or the background of the student. But we view statistics as more like a science of handling uncertainty. And then in my field relate to, no matter you call simulation, optimization, or you call it AI, I think the students should have a certain training about how to handle this uncertainty. Otherwise, there would be another extreme to handle the technology, everything as more like a certain. I think how to handle the uncertainty is an important part. So not because of the algorithm or just like just the technology, but I think it's more like a scientific part that I think is more important for the training.
And where would you stand, Jane?
I would not say it should be compulsory. It depends on the topic, and I'm now thinking of all different kind of topics of PhD projects, and I think it's very hard to sort of say that for all different research areas it is a benefit to have a course like that. So I would say that it depends on the research area that you are into, because it's different to think of courses on ethics, for example. That could be a compulsory course in all different areas. That's much easier to judge. But AI, I'm a little bit more no, I'm not there yet to say that it should be compulsory. No.
So would we fall in a challenge if a student is in a different discipline and then doesn't know about what the opportunities that AI would bring? Wouldn't a course in AI be helpful to open his mind to see what AI can bring into his field?
Oh yes, there are lots of other tools and techniques that also can bring fantastic progress in fields. So why just choose AI?
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe I can add here to what my co-panelists said, which of course it's a very valid point to make, that we don't have infinite time. So in that sense, we have to really think through what we spend our time on. But perhaps I can flip it around and make it more as a responsibility of the universities or of any institution anyway that offers the training. That if we think about most of the courses, we don't start from the beginning of time and say, oh, you know what, before we did mathematics in the wrong way, then we started doing it properly, then we had, we just directly jump to tools that make sense right now. And, thinking, for instance, simple tools like regression. Are we teaching them up to date? If we see regression modeling as being up to date, isn't part of machine learning and AI part of it as well? So perhaps it's not a call necessarily of saying that we need a specific course or we need necessarily, everybody to become able to understand all the niceties or the peculiarities of AI, but it's more about the call for the university to make sure that we are looking as many years forward as we're expected to, which is a difficult thing to make. It's not like I can come out and say now, okay, here are the 5 changes. I wouldn't know the 5 changes myself, but it's surely a call for all of us that design these courses to make sure that we are always up to date.
Yeah, sounds so great. So it depends, maybe we can say, on the supervisor as well. So the supervisor can tell the student what are the things that can benefit him, and then the student can take more courses on this stuff instead of making it mandatory for all courses. Mm-hmm. And this includes, as you mentioned, other things like maybe math, programming languages, statistics, and so. Sounds good. Before we take a break, would anyone want to make a follow-up comment? So we take a 5-minute breaks before we go to the Q&A by the audience, so that the panelists can rest a little bit. And then we analyze what we have in the chat and we continue with questions from the audience. Yes, see you in 5 minutes. So meanwhile, our audience, please post your questions in the chat so that when the panelists come from the break, we continue with your questions. So please, audience, you can add your questions in the chat. We will have Q&A session from the audience.
So to Sarah, there is an interesting question from Alberto Montebelli.
Yes, so when everyone is back, we can begin with it. Yes, so welcome everybody. So we have some questions in the chat. We can begin with Alberto's question. The very interesting discussion has implicitly treated AI as pragmatic tool. However, the name AI embeds the human ambition of modeling biological cognition. Are applied AI and the current funding strategy suffocating genuine advances, innovation in the basic research of artificial cognition? Who wants to start with this?
So I can start. I think we are biased here because we are all applying, or we are in fields where we want to apply AI. So I don't think any of us are contributing to the field of AI. We are using existing results. That's what I'm hearing. And if I'm not getting that right, I hope the other one will tell me I'm wrong. So, but most research funding and research programs out there for funding, they seem very much focused on applying AI. And to the extent they might develop artificial intelligence methods, it seems to be in the direction of being applied. So the area that Alberto is mentioning, I'm not sure it's suffocating, but the other type of funding is definitely dominating.
Yeah, and if we take this question, who is really responsible maybe for developing the AI itself? So other fields may claim that, okay, we are using the technology of AI that data science researchers are developing. Is that the case? Or who is responsible for doing more core research in AI?
That is really interesting, because, I mean, reading this, I was thinking, what we actually did in a project where we got a lot of funding from the National Board of Health to look into if it was possible to actually use AI to see the age of a person in the bone. We did this to sort of try to increase the legal the legality of such a factor. Then what we used, we did the application. We used big companies, and we ended up for our CNN, we ended up using Google's system for it. So actually, I think that most of this research is done by companies. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but the one that we are looking at and the tools that we're using is big industry tools rather than generic tools that are taken out from, and of course there are a lot of researchers there, but they're not independent researchers. They're from companies that want to make money out of this. And I didn't really think about it in that way. So it's a good question from that perspective.
So healthcare people, medicine people, they understand, maybe we can say that they understand the human intelligence more. So can we say that they can contribute to the artificial intelligence more? Not really. What would you say, Jane?
Come on, Jane.
You're muted, Jane, sorry. Sorry, Jane, you are muted. Can you?
Yes, I was saying understanding human intelligence. I would not say that we, everybody in healthcare can do that. So I don't think it's a big difference between healthcare sector and other sectors when it comes to contributing there. But reading the question that Alberto passed in the chat there, I think that most of the people or the examples that we have brought up now has to do with other research areas, not pure AI research. So at least from my perspective, we have other research questions that we want to find ways to answer by using AI. And then the core thing is not maybe to develop new AI-based methods, because that would be a whole research area in itself. So to do both, to be an expert on AI research, and then I mean develop new methods and new approaches and so on. Then and also be an expert in, for example, in vitro disease modeling, which is my topic. That is not very many that can have expertise in both, or maybe another one at the same time.
Could we turn that question back to Alberto, because it doesn't seem as we know. Do you feel that there is a lack of funding for sort of basic research in artificial cognition? Does it? Because I don't know. As we said here, we only see that the application is something that is driven very much by the need to actually see that we can use this for something. But I mean, I would assume that there are a lot of basic research going on, because the tools are becoming increasingly better, and the CNNs that we actually can use, that the big companies have produced, are actually producing good results. So could we turn that around?
Yeah, so if we take this angle, as we mentioned, lots of research are done in the application area, less than the core AI. Would one of the reasons be the view that the core AI is already saturated? Are we going through a winter of AI?
I can perhaps relate that from my experience from early 2000s, where it was the previous revolution of AI. And again, the previous big hope that everything would work out. And actually, I would argue that in that period, the core research and maybe research on AI and cognition was much stronger than it is now. Not in terms that now it doesn't exist, to my understanding at least, but as a proportion of how much research is happening in each area. What is very different this time, and I don't think now we're talking about here is another revolution, and in 10 years to talk about yet another one, is that now it has become a mainstream tool. As Peter mentioned quite correctly, most of the, at least in terms of tools advances are happening from groups like Google, Amazon Web Services, Facebook, Uber, and so on. They all of them provide free libraries to use, and you know, you can see NVIDIA, for instance, offering specialized graphics cards to do deep learning and so on. So why is that the case? Because now AI has reached a level where people can say, I can see how I can apply it to make money. And that makes it a big industry in itself. Whereas when we're talking about the core AI research, that's a different perspective. It's basic research that will develop to different things that are more applicable years later on. Perhaps it's very interesting, you know, as an academic curiosity, to think a bit how things like CNN and so on started to exist, or deep learning. Deep learning is not a new idea. It's just that it became possible to have it running more in the recent years because of the computational needs, and obviously some developments. But one brought the other. You know, there was the question before, can we have innovation in AI in other fields? I would argue yes. I would argue that most of the cognitive research that happened in the early 2000s was not driven by AI researchers, but was driven by AI researchers who were putting one hand in some other field, or had some close friend that went together, I don't know, for a walk or for a drink, and then say, how can you solve this problem for me? I very vividly remember one story in one of my first conferences, where it was, the keynote was about presenting a full model of the brain, and they were very happy that they managed to simulate in a year's time 12 seconds of activity. And they thought they had a bug because they saw in the brain that there were some propagation of signals that were not in the inputs of the system. And when the mathematician who ran the program was discussing with a colleague who was a biologist, the biologist said, oh yeah, we see that stuff in the brain as well. And from this discussion, they started realizing, okay, there is something actually more here than a bug. My point being is that, as very correctly the other panelists have made the point several times, there are two types of AI. One is very easy to put to practice and get money out of it, and that will get more funding because private funding is there, and that makes sense. And there is the blue sky research thinking that I don't think a pure AI researcher or a pure biologist or a pure econometrician can do them on their own. It's just too deep research, if you wish, to do it on your own. At least that's my take.
So I would like to add to this. To me, it seems like, so you have one aspect of using standardized AI in applications, and then you still have motivation for doing research in the methods of AI, because the methods, any method development, whether it's applied in industry or not, is constrained by the axiom or assumptions that are being made around, for example, what can we do with machine learning, whether we're using it in an application or not, what can we do? So in order to generalize the results of machine learning or unify it with other techniques within the area of machine learning, we still have to go back to basic research. What I think Alberto is saying is not necessarily core AI. I think maybe it has to do with classical AI, where AI is being used in order to understand the human behavior, or finding models that possibly can explain how the brain is working. But maybe Alberto can correct me. And that is basic research as well. But I wouldn't say that, for example, extending the mathematics behind machine learning would not be basic research just because it has a different motivator. The question is where the contributions are being made. So that's my take on it. But I think the cognition aspect and how we use it for analyzing human behavior or the brain, I think that is really important, or how we learn things.
So can we say that we have a problem of defining what is AI? So the definition of AI has changed through the history of AI, starting from how it was logical deduction, and then suddenly AI becomes equals to machine learning, and then it becomes like just data analysis. And what's next? Like, what is the definition of AI? Is it equal to human intelligence? Like if we take the follow-up question of Nikolas, that machine intelligence equals to human intelligence, or how would you perceive AI, or how would you follow up on this?
I have only a short comment on this one. I'm quite happy for it to stay ill-defined, because then it's more inclusive. More people can come up with great ideas.
So every time we come up with a new definition, and then we come up with new research regarding this new definition.
So would this be true then?
So sometimes we say machine learning is statistics. Sometimes we say it's artificial intelligence, and whatever MS we have, we call it AI.
So I think that there are certain areas like the classic AI trying to understand what is intelligence at the core and how do we humans work. But I think also there are areas which become something else. Genetic algorithms was considered AI 20 years ago. Now it's not considered AI at all. It's considered algorithms. So I think that while certain areas with AI matures, it might be framed in different contexts. So I wonder, for example, does all pattern matching and visual recognition, will that be considered AI down the road? I'm not sure.
And a more philosophical take on that is it actually what we want to do to be able to emulate the biology or the biological cognitive thinking? Do we see that as optimal in the world of intelligence, the human brain? I don't know. We're not optimized in any other way. So why would the emulation or simulation of what we are doing be considered the golden standard?
So if I jump into this discussion, I think simulation is not duplication. What I mean is we need to separate intelligence with other human attributes. I think I'm about to talk about this cognitions, but I think even more high level, we talk about consciousness. I think computer can be super intelligent without any consciousness at all. What I mean is, of course, I think we are a bit biased. He talked about this pragmatic tool. I think on another aspect, we talk about problem solving. I think people start to find about the new generation of algorithm is very good in solving problem without being very super intelligent, without need to emulate other human aspect like consciousness. So that's why I think I don't think, as Jorgen mentioned, there is any conflict between these two type of funding agency, funding the research. But I do think that when people get more interest on how the problem solving can be done with AI, then we'll be more shift towards that part of the research instead of using AI to replace real human intelligence. So, but if I go back to what Sarah, you started this discussions, I don't think that we can define artificial intelligence to be equivalent to human intelligence. So I think there must be other human attributes that make it very different by just saying that the super intelligence that AI can simulate, but not duplicate.
And as Nikolas said, it's better not to define AI so that everybody can contribute in the way that they define their AI. And Jorgen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the ethical aspect. So here is a case. Can we get a system to reason about ethics? Or if I'm presenting 1,000 cases of ethical problems, and then I present 1,000 solutions according to different philosophies of ethics, and then I ask the AI system, can you find something that is pattern-wise similar to one of the 1,000 cases in order to make a similar decision? So 2 different solutions, but still viable.
So does that mean that the AI just takes our bias of how we see things? So
Possibly, but it depends also if we get a system that is generating an alternative solution. Question is, can we figure out what is the proof or how does the reasoning go? That part I don't know, but what I'm saying is that there are patterns even within ethical problems, and that doesn't seem to me impossible to necessarily solve or try to find ways of actually getting a reasonable output to an ethical problem that is similar to something else of thousands of cases, depending on what kind of ethical paradigm you want to buy into.
So it's not only about the AI, but also about the researcher and how the researcher would evaluate this. So it's not the same even for human, not just for machines. Can we say that the researcher is implicitly putting his ethical view in the machine?
I think it's much more than implicitly. I would argue that it's quite explicit in this case, because, you know, but is this an AI problem, or is it just a modeling problem? If I build, let's say, a model that will be used by a bank to decide who gets a loan or who gets a credit card and so on, and I say this is the best model, but actually what I have done is I have considered a worldview that only fits my worldview. And yes, it gives me a valid model, but, you know, some other person might come with an equally good model but has different variables. Haven't I just biased the whole solution? So in that sense, an AI system, I don't think it is more or less problematic in that way. And if anything, a lot of the times in the previous responses, many people alluded to the point of having AI as a support tool, as a decision support tool, or as a counterfactual. I think that's a very valid use of it, because if through that we can actually identify some biases, either in the AI or in our decision making, that's great. Then we have them clashing, and then we can at least spot it rather than be blind to it.
I think, Jorgen, you pose a very interesting question. So if you really can present like a large data set presenting some ethical problem, but I wonder whether you really can have some data set that is totally unbiased. And then if your data set is really unbiased, that means there is already some human behind that decide that the data set must be unbiased. So you already have someone that impose certain logic, certain value onto the data set. So let's take an example. If you ask an AI engine to recruit a new employee, okay? And then the AI engine will be trained by a large data set. So let's say that the data set is already some sort of a bias towards a certain type of people to make the decisions. Then of course, I think the outcome will be the bias, you know, in terms of the recruitment. But then if someone say that, no, we need to have a totally unbiased, really like fair recruitment, okay? Then, you know, it's someone that imposes something on the data set. So my question is, do you really possible to have something that is totally unbiased without any human interventions to say that the data set has to be unbiased? Do you understand my questions here?
Yeah, so I see. So, but so if we generalize that problem, any kind, well, not any kind, but I guess many problems of that nature will be, if I'm trying to associate an output with an input, I need to have either some kind of evaluation. The question is if that is an objective evaluation or there is a risk for a subjective evaluation. And I guess that depends also in the case of ethics, if there are, let's say that there is somewhat of a consensus if you're solving an ethical problem, maybe that would not be unbiased. But anyone who is making a qualitative, subjective take on that they suggest the solution, yes, there is some kind of subjectivity, and then you will be automatically possibly biased. So I agree with you. I just think in some cases you might be able to work around it by having multiple people on the answering side come to the same consensus.
So if the same model with different data sets produce different outputs, can we say that just collecting more data would solve this?
But and that always comes down to some sort of optimization problem if you want to do it in that sense, because I mean it's not the black boxing that is the problem, that you have an input and then you want an output. You have this several, you have such a multifaceted and complex problems that the way we optimize and the way we find the best solution is so implicitly and explicitly biased within the program of the system that I don't think that it is possible anyway.
I can quickly give the comment to what Peter has just said is, you know, when you frame this into now is not like a training neural network problem, now it's an optimization problem. Then someone also need to decide what is the objective and what are the objectives. And then if there are conflicting solutions, someone also need to select based on certain value. Of course, you can put your value into the algorithm, but still there is someone's algorithm. Someone's values, what I want to say. So to me, I think it's a quite interesting question that Jorgen posed. Can it be totally possible that you can throw into something related to ethical problem and then just come up with some unbiased result? I think this is a very interesting question.
It is, and I don't think it's possible, but yeah. No?
But the question is,
perhaps go ahead, Jorgen.
The question is also if we can build an AI system that is biased, which is quite possible. If we're assuming that an AI system is using statistics, and then you can reduce a number of data sets, you can to smaller data sets, and at some point you will find correlations, but that only means that you have patterns in data sets that are not really that important because you're missing to have patterns at the very end. So that is called a statistical bias. And so possibly that would end up in an AI system as well. And if we're not understanding the outcome of a system, you might wonder how we came to that. So maybe there is a preference in the system to go a certain direction. And yeah, so that's my take.
Interesting.
And what was your follow-up, Nikolas?
Well, essentially, maybe sidestepping, not following up so necessarily, but one thing I like about this discussion is that we're actually looking at, you know, can we somehow avoid or limit that bias? But one thing that I find quite interesting in this is that if we think that AI has this artificial intelligence side to it, can we actually take teachings from how we train AI models to avoid bias potentially, if it's possible, on exactly how it is, and maybe transfer it back to our education? Can we actually use AI systems and the learning process to sort of feedback to how we should do it in society as well, perhaps to limit bias in our points of view? Jorgen made before the very good point, I think, of using multiple data sets, or I would say potentially multiple humans or multiple models to decide so that some of the biases is cancelled out. And, you know, in controlled experiments, you can show very easily that statistically speaking, that is true. Can we maybe find a better way to do that for our AI and then say, well, perhaps it should go in our university courses as well? Again, blue sky thinking here. I'm not claiming that I have any clue on how to resolve that.
But what if we, our developers, are blind of this bias? Is there a probability that we cannot see the bias because it comes from us, so we see that this is the optimum?
But that's always the problem with unbiased, because you're not aware about it. So that's why you try to, I don't even know if that's possible, but you try to you can possibly work around that problem by having heterogeneous groups trying to understand the outcome of it, to possibly see if the value biases can be at least reduced.
Or we only get a regression to the mean.
Yeah.
So having a diversity maybe can solve this. They can, like others can open our eye to see what we cannot see. Yes, sounds very interesting. And we are reaching the end of our time. So as a last question, how would you see the field in 10 years, let's say? So each can tell us about his field and how can AI contribute in the next 10 years?
Fully accepted. We have a better understanding of the limitations of it. We can also see the maturity of that. Within 10 years, most likely the funding will be as thematically oriented around AI, because we might be beyond the acceleration phase.
Very optimistic view. Do you have any other views?
No, I would see my area pretty much the same way, that it will be a slow and continuous increase of the utility of the AI tools as a support to human decision, rather than having robot doctors meeting you, or maybe that is some sort of filtering system that we could actually use, that we could keep people away from the healthcare system as long as possible, and give them create valid feedback loops to people to take their own decisions. And I would hope that this also to some extent could democratize healthcare, both within groups in the country and all over the world. So I'm cautiously optimistic in this area.
So I would like to add something to my answer, because I realized I'm biased. So because being an applied researcher, I talked about AI in the sense of how much it can be used in various systems and so forth. But I think the classical AI, which is used to try to understand the human behavior and the brain, that is such a different level of complexity. So I don't think we will have, that will continue in this same pace or even more. So the applicable part, I think, will be in a different place if we separate the two.
But Google and Amazon will do it, not the researchers, or?
I don't know. But Google is essentially cleaning the market for AI researchers in US. They cannot get enough. They are even hiring computer scientists and others and train them in AI in order to get enough people.
Yeah, the industry is even a completely big topic to talk about, and how it comes to the AI and dominating the field of AI. And as a conclusion, Jane or Nicholas wants to say something first?
I can say, as someone who does research in forecasting, I avoid doing forecasts, especially for the long term. But I think it's relevant to the audience, perhaps, that Jorgen's point on the funding is very, very relevant. Currently, you can get funding potentially for many different aspects of AI, application, core research, or whatnot. But in 10 years, that probably will not be the case, because there will be something different AI or something called differently altogether. Now, if that covers both the application and the core research, I really have no clue, but at least for younger researchers trying to get in the field, that's something that they should keep in mind, that when I was younger, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, different things got funded. Now it's, things are evolving, but good luck, I guess.
Yeah, good to say that the field is still open for others to come in, so that we don't scare the students. We have lots of students in the audience. What would you say, Jane?
Yeah, in the field of life science and healthcare, I think that, and this is just my speculation, of course, I have really no clue, but I think it will be used for predicting and preventing people from being from developing a disease, so that we can keep people healthier, so we can identify by the help of AI-based methods how we can avoid developing different disease. That's how I think it will be used in the future, which is good, of course.
Would you like to say a word, Amos?
I think for me to make a prediction, of course, I think it's always dangerous to make prediction, but the general trend will be more AI applications in industry. But I think it will be more like silently instead of, I think sometimes people call it the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, I think there is a certain initiative here behind what Germany tried to do. I think the applications will be more and more, but it will be more silently when, as I keep mentioning, I think people know how to customize the algorithm for certain problem. Instead of like a high impact, you just have a super intelligent algorithm that can solve all problems. But there is quite sure, I think in 10 years, there will be more and more AI applications.
Sounds great. We have a bright future, I think. As a conclusion for our discussion, I would like to thank our panelists for spending our time in this discussion, and I would appreciate your efforts. Thank you, Peter Underbird, Amos Indi, Jens Sinergen, Jorgen Hansen, Nikolas Corrensis. I really appreciate your efforts. You will receive a gift as a sign of appreciation. You will receive it by mail. And I would like also to thank the audience for spending this time with us. I hope it was informative, it was useful. And thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.